This is the story of the Beamish Grey Lady. It is a local story from just across the way yonder, and it is a story of love and tragedy, and most importantly, it is a true story. Now, a long time ago, just across the way over yonder, there was a place called Beamish Hall, and it was lived in by a family, a rather wealthy family, who owned all of the land all the way round here. They were related to the Shaftos, as in Bobby Shafto, and there's a song about him. Now, they had a father, a mother, and a daughter, an older daughter. Now, she was coming up to the age of about 16 years of age, and she was quite rebellious for the time. So she didn't want to spend her time sat in with her governess and her teacher, learning elocution, learning to play the piano. No. She wanted to go out and explore. And she wanted to go out and explore her wider gardens and lands. And so she did. And every day she would make an excuse that she needed to get fresh air and exercise. And she would go out and explore all around her lands and gardens. But then obviously she got bored of doing that, every day seeing the same things. Now she knew obviously that her family owned all of the land which was around the Beamish Hall, and that included all the land where we are now, and also just up the hill over at Pockley. And now that was a tenant farm, and so the land belonged to them, but the farmers were tenants who lived there, and they were a gentleman farmer. Now he had a bailiff who lived in the house just attached to his farmhouse, and the bailiff had two sons. Now the younger son worked on the land as a farmhand, and he would go out and do all sorts of jobs that his father needed him to do, but he would work in the fields down at Pockley Bottom, which is just across the way. Now this young girl, when she wanted to be a little bit more rebellious, she would walk out and go on strolls in the land that they owned, which was all around here. And she plotted a walk where she would walk from Beamish Burn over the bridge. She would walk round where the Pit Village area is now, walk down through there past Pockley Bottom, back down to Beamish Burn, and up and across the bridge. And she would do that every day. But one day she spied something that she had never seen before. She spied something that she thought was beautiful and handsome. It was the most handsome thing she'd ever seen. And it was this young lad from up at Pockley. Now she even was a high status lady. She hadn't seen very many men that weren't either in her family or part of her family's staff and servants. So she was amazed by him, by his figure. She fell head over heels, and this little spark had emerged in the pit of her stomach like a little ember. And up there it burned and burned away. And so she decided that every day she would go on that same walk at the same time so that she could see this young lad from Pockley. And what she didn't realise is that he had already spied her, and she had not seen it. And the same thing had happened to him. He had thought she was the most beautiful woman in the whole world. After all, he only had his other sister and his mother and his grandmother to look at, and that's not very much. So, a little spark had emerged in the pit of his stomach, and it burned and burned away. And so every day he would make sure he was working in those fields at the time that she walked past. Now weeks and weeks passed of them just catching glimpses of each other, and it wasn't enough for either of them. So he decided that what he would do is he would go the other way round, and he would come down Beamish Burn as she goes up it, and they would bump into each other. And then he would have to say hello to her, because at this time you didn't just go up and talk to somebody. No. If you were a young lad and you wanted to talk to a young girl, you needed to have a chaperone, and also you needed to have an appointment, basically. So one day he walked the other way round, crept down just around a curve where he could hear her walking up, humming a wonderful tune that he thought was obviously from heaven above. And suddenly she came round, he went round the other way around this corner, and they bumped into each other. And they said hello. They obviously had to. They literally bumped into each other. And those little sparks that were burning inside the pit of their stomachs, when they said hello, they erupted into an inferno. And they spoke there for hours. Hours and hours and hours. Until obviously it was getting late. And she needed to get back, so they parted and off they went. They realised that they had to see each other again. So every day they would meet down there and they would stand and chat for hours. Weeks and weeks passed, months and months passed, and they soon realised that they could not keep doing this because somebody would notice eventually. So they decided that they would meet at Beamish Burn Bridge on the full moon. Now, they would meet on the full moon because the moon was bright enough to shed light so that they could see each other. So then she would not have to carry a lantern because it was close to Beamish Hall, so somebody would see the light. And it was also far enough away from Pockley so that he wouldn't be missed and nobody could find him. So there they would meet and they would spend the night together. They would do what lovers do. They would chat and while away the time dreaming about spending the rest of their lives with each other. And they did this for years until she was now approaching the age of 21 and needed to be married. And her father was obviously concerned that he was not going to find her a proper suitor. Every suitor that he had brought to her, she had turned away, she'd dismissed for some reason. And he'd got fed up with this. He was desperate to find her a husband, somebody to take care of her when he was gone. So he went down and found a younger son of the Lambton family, which is further down in County Durham. And he had set up arrangements for them to marry. Now, when he told his daughter, he thought that she would be ecstatic. He finally found a good match with lots of money, somebody who can take care of her. But she wasn't. She was distraught. She said, I don't want to marry him. I've never seen him before. I don't know who he is. Now, obviously, her father was not happy about this. He had worked and worked to try and find her a suitor and a husband to look after her. And she had turned him away, another one. He was at his wit's end. He erupted into an inferno and he said, you will marry him. And you will marry him soon, before your 21st birthday. The arrangements are set. And that was that. She ran off and at the next full moon she met her lover and she told him what her father had said. He was obviously just as distraught as she was. They knew what they had to do. They had to run away and elope together. They didn't care about money. They didn't care about their families. They just wanted to spend the rest of their lives together. He was adamant that they go, but she had a sensible head on her. And she said, we will wait until the next full moon and then we will have that time to prepare everything that we need. So they agreed and they did. And that time came around very, very quickly. And it just so coincidentally landed on her wedding day. And suddenly she was stood in front of this huge mirror with a long flowing gown. And she realised, I can't marry this other person, I have to get away. But how do I get away? There's guests everywhere. So she thought of the only thing that she could. She went up into the top attic rooms and then she went further back, and at the back of the attic rooms where all the servants' quarters were, just behind there was a back attic space that had not been used for years. It had a small door in the wall and in front of it there was an old cabinet. So she was able to move the cabinet slightly, squeeze through and get through this door. And there in the back attic space she found a large leather trunk, about 6 foot long. She opened it up. It was empty. She climbed inside and she thought, no one will find me here. And she was right. As she closed the lid, the lock latched, and that was it. She was stuck inside. She waited and waited, and then she cried and cried out for help, and nobody could hear her. The walls in the back attic were thick stone. Now the guests were obviously getting impatient, and eventually her father said to everyone to search the house. They searched the house. They then searched the grounds, and then they searched the wider grounds and the lands that they owned. Now eventually somebody spoke about this young lad from up at Pockley who kept disappearing on the first full moon of the month. And so they went and questioned him. And eventually they found out that they were lovers, and they tried to find out where she was from him, but he could not tell them because she had not said what she was going to do. All he knew is that he had to meet her on that night in the light of the full moon on Beamish Burn Bridge, and then they would elope together and spend the rest of their lives together. Now, they questioned and questioned and questioned, and as he couldn't tell them, they used more brutal methods. They flogged him down at the bottom of Beamish Burn, and still he could not tell them. So, with that, the search went on. It went on for weeks and months. And her father could never come to terms with the fact that he could never find his daughter. And eventually it was only years and years later, after her father's death, that they were renovating up in the back attic spaces. They went in, and there they found a large leather trunk, about 6 foot long, and it was locked. So they took a hammer and they smashed the lock. They pulled it open, and there inside was the body of a young girl in a long flowing gown, no longer with bright colours and beautiful threads, golds and reds. It was now grey with age, dust and decay. On the inside were claw marks as she tried to scratch her way out, as she'd called for help and nobody had heard her screams. And it is said that on a full moon, if you go down to Beamish Burn Bridge, you may see a lady stood there, all in grey, with a veil across her face, stood waiting, and then she walks from Beamish Burn Bridge right the way up, round where the pit village is now, through and past Pockley Bottom, back down to Beamish Burn, and up to the bridge where she stands and waits for her lover, who never comes.